Hi, I'm Darren Miller, the National City Life Director for Youth for Christ, and we're continuing on our series of cross-core training. And today we're going to be talking about culture shock. And regardless of your core ministry, regardless of which particular type of kids you're working with, culture shock can affect all of us. And in YFC, if our mission is to reach young people everywhere, then understanding the effects of culture shock and what that might do to you and your volunteers is important for us to look at. And so, regardless of the type of kid in culture or subculture, unless you're indigenous to that particular culture, there's going to be some shock, some recognition. If I'm working with kids from different socioeconomic status from where you particularly grew up at, different racial or ethnic backgrounds. It could be even gangs. Maybe you're working with kids that have been in gangs and it's something that you've not experienced personally. Regardless, athletes, jocks, maybe if that wasn't your particular, the way that you grew up or the kids that you hung out with, there's going to be things that you don't understand. And you'll need to be able to, as you're walking into that culture in a background that maybe wasn't yours, there's going to be a certain level of shock that will occur. And so what we're going to do today is really kind of go after how do we minimize those effects. We recognize that they exist, but how do we begin to overcome and work through them? And not only that for you as a leader in Youth for Christ, but volunteers that you work with, leaders that you recruit, to be able to walk them through understanding how to overcome culture shock. So really, what is culture shock? So culture shock is when a person is in a new place, is unfamiliar with the social conventions and the ways of operating socially in that particular culture. Or if familiar with them, they're either unable or unwilling to perform according to these rules. So there's unwritten rules that exist in every kind of culture or subculture, and if you're not familiar with them, then you could miss some of the connection with young people that you're ministering to. And so it happens to all of us, regardless of your background. Unless you're indigenous to that particular culture or subculture, it's going to happen. And so being able to recognize that it's real and it's there is really important, again, for you to train your volunteers and those who are leading in your ministry in order to be most effective. And so we want to be able to recognize also that we're in a spiritual battle. And so Satan uses culture shock and ways to keep barriers between people so that communication is hindered and the relationship doesn't develop into more than that, especially for us in our desire to share Christ with young people, that the enemy would use those barriers of culture to keep us from really going deep and relating with young people. And so being able to walk through that with our team and our leaders is very important. So barriers exist. If we don't recognize it, if we don't talk through them, if we don't realize how can we overcome them or even see that they're there, then we're going to have hindrances to those relationships and being able to move forward with people that we're trying to reach. If we want to reach the ever, we need to know what those barriers are and how to overcome them. Trust is the highway to the gospel. And so if our desire, again, is reaching kids with the gospel, then trust is that highway. And so these barriers are barriers to trust and being able to open that highway. Our desired outcomes of really going after the area of culture shock is to recognize that it exists in our lives, that it's there, and we want to be able to be equipped to love and persevere through those barriers between cultures. We also have to understand that culture shock, in order to shepherd and lead volunteers that we're working with in our ministry, to be able to overcome culture shock. So how do we go about doing this? Really, it starts with me and you, and it starts with our hearts. So we're going to, in our 4 series, we're going to really look at how it starts within our hearts and what we're to do about that, and then our approach. Practically, how do we begin to overcome and to work with our volunteers to overcome?